They called it the most dangerous base in Afghanistan. I thought it was an exaggeration until the first night the mortars hit. I still remember the convoy ride out to Firebase Skin. The roads were little more than dusty trails carved into mountains, narrow enough that if your Humvee's tires slipped, you'd tumble straight into the ravine. We were packed in tight, rifles across our laps, trying not to think about how close we were to Pakistan. The brass told us Skin was the zero line, the edge of the war on terror, the border where everything spilled across. It wasn't a matter of if we'd see combat, but when. The base itself looked like something out of a war movie, only stripped bare. Hesco barriers, sandbags, a few plywood shacks, and dug-in fighting positions on the high ground. No comfort, no safety, just a place to fight from. The second we rolled through the gate, I felt it. The air was different. The mountains pressed in around us, silent, watching. The older guys, the ones already seasoned, called it the ghost zone. Not because of hauntings, but because too many men had already died here, and too many more would follow. We were barely settled in when it happened. I was inside, trying to catch my breath after unloading gear, when the alarm went up. A thump, deep and hollow, echoed through the air. Then another. Mortars. The whole firebase came alive. Boots pounded on dirt, radios squawked, and someone yelled incoming. I dove for the bunker as the first round exploded just outside the wire. Dirt and shrapnel showered down. My ears rang so hard I couldn't tell if I was shouting or silent. It was chaos. Guys scrambling into firing positions. Tracers already cutting the sky as someone spotted movement beyond the perimeter. My rifle shook in my hands as I aimed into the dark, the adrenaline so sharp I could feel my heart in my teeth. The mortars kept coming, slamming the ground, each one closer than the last. The air stank of cordite and burning dirt. That first night stretched into forever. When the attack finally tapered off, all that was left was smoke and silence. No casualties, not yet. But I understood why the veterans had that hollow look in their eyes. Skin wasn't a posting, it was a sentence. Out here, you weren't a soldier holding a base. You were bait, waiting for the next strike. The next morning, I saw the damage in daylight. Craters gouged into the earth just a few feet from our positions, splintered sandbags shredded by shrapnel, walls blackened with soot. The sun rose over the jagged ridges of Pakistan, and it felt less like morning and more like a warning. We hadn't even been here a full day. Daily life started sinking fast. Sleep was fractured, 2 hours here, 1 there, always half awake waiting for alarms. We lived on MREs and bitter instant coffee, chewing while checking our rifles like they were lifelines. Dust coated everything, your boots, your skin, even the inside of your teeth. The radios never stopped crackling, and every time someone muttered movement outside the wire, your stomach dropped. It wasn't just the attacks. It was the anticipation. The Taliban knew the terrain better than we ever could. They slipped across the border like shadows, set up their tubes, and rained hell on us before melting away into the hills. Sometimes they didn't even fire, just let us stew, waiting for the sound that never came. That's what got into your head, the waiting. On the third night, I was on watch at one of the towers. The sky was clear, stars scattered like dust, and the mountains were black shapes against the horizon. I thought I saw movement downrange, just a flicker like someone darting behind a rock. My finger tightened on the trigger, my breath caught. Then nothing, just silence. When I reported it, the sergeant just grunted. "You'll see them when they want you to." That line stuck with me. Out here, we weren't hunters. We were the hunted. By the end of that first week, we'd taken fire 4 times. Mortars at night, small arms skirmishes on the ridges, the occasional RPG streaking across the sky. Each time, the same routine, alarms, firing, waiting for the enemy to fade. We rarely saw them up close. Ghost fighters, in and out before you could blink, but their presence was constant, like the ground itself hated us. What I didn't expect was the bond. You learn fast at a place like Skin that the guy next to you is all that stands between you and a body bag. We joked, we cursed, we bitched about the food and the heat, but when the alarm hit, we moved like one. That unity was the only comfort out here, stronger than the walls or the bunkers. One night, after another barrage that rattled our bones but left us breathing, I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling. My rifle rested inches from my hand. I thought about home, about the kid I was before all this. And I realized something. If I made it back, I'd never be that kid again. Skin takes pieces of you, not all at once, but bit by bit, with every incoming round, every friend's tired stare, every minute of silence between firefights. It doesn't just test you, it changes you. And I was only just beginning to learn how much. The days at Skin all bled together, but that didn't make them any easier. Every sunrise was a reminder that we'd made it through the night, and every sunset was a warning that we might not see another morning. Life on the firebase wasn't life at all. It was survival in its rawest form. The base itself sat like a scar on a landscape, carved in a hostile ground. From the watchtowers, you could see the jagged ridgelines of Pakistan stretching endlessly. We knew the Taliban used those mountains like highways, slipping back and forth across the border as if it didn't exist. To us, it was a line we couldn't cross. To them, it was a shield. Daytime brought no comfort. The heat baked the dirt until it shimmered. Dust clung to your skin and gear, turning sweat into mud. We filled sandbags, repaired bunkers, ran comms checks, and patrolled the wire. Every task was done with one eye on the horizon, always expecting movement, always waiting for that distant pop that signaled an incoming round. Patrols were the worst. Small squads would move out into the mountains, searching caves or checking routes where fighters were rumored to slip through. We carried everything on our backs: ammo, water, grenades, radios. The terrain punished every step. Loose rock that rolled beneath your boots, slopes so steep your thighs burned, air so thin your lungs ached. Silence hung heavy, sometimes too heavy. That was the moment you knew you weren't alone. On one patrol, we came across an old cave system. Intel said fighters had been using it as a staging ground. We went in slow, weapons up, hearts pounding. The air inside was damp and cold, a shock after the burning sun. Our boots crunched on gravel, echoing in the darkness. The cave twisted deeper, shadows swallowing the light from our tack lamps. We found evidence of use: discarded food wrappers, ammo casings, even prayer rugs. But no fighters. They'd melted away before we got there, leaving just enough behind to remind us how close we'd come. It was like that often, chasing ghosts across the hills. You knew they were watching, tracking, planning. We could feel their eyes on us long before we saw a muzzle flash. It messed with your head, made you second-guess every shadow, every sound of shifting rocks. Back on the firebase, nights were worse than the days. Darkness was their cover. Mortars and RPGs came without warning. Sometimes it was just one or two rounds, other times a sustained barrage that shook the ground. We'd sprint to our fighting positions, hearts hammering, scanning the ridges for muzzle flashes. The sky would light up with tracers, the air thick with the stink of gunpowder. Then silence again. Always silence. Sleep became a luxury. You learned to drift in and out in 20-minute bursts, boots on, rifle at arm's reach. Dreams blurred with reality. Some guys talked in their sleep, reliving firefights, muttering half-finished radio calls. Others woke up screaming, clutching rifles before realizing where they were. The rest of us just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the next alarm. We tried to hold on to little routines to keep sane. Smoking on the bunkers, telling jokes so bad they were funny just because they cut the tension. Cleaning rifles became almost meditative. Strip, oil, reassemble, over and over until your hands did it without thought. Anything to keep your mind from spiraling. But even routine had its cracks. One night, while manning a tower with Rodriguez, we heard faint chatter on the radio net. It wasn't ours. The voices were low, speaking Pashto, too clear to be interference. They were close. Too close. We froze, scanning the darkness. My finger rested on the trigger, every nerve on edge. Then, as suddenly as it started, the voices vanished. Just static. We never saw anyone, never fired a shot, but we knew they were out there, listening to us as much as we listened for them. That was the rhythm of skin, waiting, watching, surviving, and sometimes losing. It was in the second month that we took our first real casualty. A routine patrol turned into a firefight when an RPG slammed into a boulder near our squad. Shrapnel cut through the air, and one of our guys, Harper, went down. We pulled him back, blood soaking his vest, his eyes wide and glassy. The medic worked fast, hands slick with red, but the damage was too much. By the time the bird came to take him out, Harper was gone. Silence fell heavier than any mortar barrage when we carried his body back to the firebase. Nobody spoke. We didn't need to. The sight of that black bag on the stretcher said everything. Harper wasn't just another name on a report. He was one of us. And now he was a hole in the team we'd never fill. That night, the base stayed quiet. No alarms, no mortars, just stillness. It was almost worse than the attacks. Like they knew. Like they were letting us mourn before the next storm. Sitting on my cot, staring at the dirt floor, I realized what Skin was doing to us. It wasn't just the danger. It was the waiting, the uncertainty, the knowledge that death could come screaming out of the dark at any second, and there wasn't a damn thing you could do to stop it. Skin stripped away every illusion I'd had about war. It wasn't glory. It wasn't heroics. It was dirt, blood, exhaustion, and the unrelenting weight of fear. And yet, every morning, we stood, strapped on our gear, and did it all again. Not because we wanted to, but because that's what it meant to survive the ghost zone. There's no such thing as a routine mission out of Skin. Every time we left the wire, we knew it could be the last. Still, orders were orders, and on that morning, our squad was tasked with pushing deeper into the mountains near the Pakistan border. Intel said fighters had been moving weapons through a series of trails out there. Our job was simple: disrupt the routes, gather intel, and if possible, make contact. Make contact was a polite way of saying, get shot at first, then shoot back. The sun was barely cresting the ridges when we set out, packs heavy, rifles clutched tight. The air was thin, every breath cutting like glass. We moved in staggered formation along a rocky slope, boots grinding dust into the earth. The silence was unnerving. No birds, no movement, just wind, whispering through jagged stone. I kept my eyes on the ridgelines. Out here, the enemy wasn't some faceless army. It was shadows with rifles, waiting for you to make a mistake. Every rock, every crevice could hide a fighter. You learned to see shapes where there were none, to anticipate muzzle flashes before they came. We'd been moving for about 2 hours when the point man raised his fist. We froze. Ahead, the trail split into a narrow pass between two cliffs. Perfect ambush ground. My throat went dry. The lieutenant whispered orders. We pushed through fast, keep eyes high, rifles ready. My heart thudded in my chest as we advanced. Halfway through the pass, it happened. The first shot cracked from above, a sharp pop that echoed like thunder. The point man went down, bullet ricocheting off his helmet. Before we could react, the cliffs lit up with fire. Tracers streaked down like red lightning. Rocks exploded around us, shards cutting into exposed skin. The air filled with the deafening roar of automatic fire. Contact, someone screamed, though we all knew. We dove for cover, pressing against stone as rounds zipped past. My hands moved on instinct, slamming a fresh mag into my rifle. I peeked over the rock, spotted a muzzle flash on the ridge, and squeezed the trigger. My rifle barked, recoil jarring my shoulder, the smell of burnt powder filling my nose. The firefight erupted into chaos. The enemy had the high ground, and they were relentless. Bullets chipped the rock inches from my face. Someone shouted for suppression fire. Grenades thumped as they arced toward the cliffs, the blast sending dust and debris cascading down. Still, they kept shooting. We needed to move, or we'd be slaughtered. The lieutenant called it bounding retreat. Half the squad laid down cover, while the other half sprinted back down the pass, then leapfrog positions. My turn came. I fired until my mag ran dry, heart pounding, then bolted, boots slipping on loose rock, lungs burning. I dove behind a boulder, gasping, reloading with shaking hands. The ambush stretched into minutes that felt like hours. Every second was survival, every movement a gamble. Finally, the sound we'd been praying for, the deep thump of mortars, our own, fired from Skin. The rounds arced over and slammed into the ridgeline, blasting the enemy positions. Smoke billowed, the gunfire stuttered, then faded. Silence. Just the ragged gasps of my squad, the ringing in my ears, and the distant rumble of collapsing rock. We regrouped, hearts still racing. The point man was alive, shaken, bruised, but his helmet had saved him. A miracle. A couple others had shrapnel wounds, nothing fatal. We were lucky, too lucky. The enemy hadn't pressed. They'd wanted to bleed us, remind us who owned the mountains. And they'd done it. The march back to Skin was quiet. No jokes, no chatter. Just the crunch of boots and the weight of realization. We weren't fighting an army here. We were fighting ghosts who knew the terrain, who knew us, who struck and vanished before we could breathe. When we finally stumbled back inside the wire, we looked like men who'd aged 10 years in a day. Sweat, dust, blood streaked our faces. The lieutenant debriefed command while the rest of us collapsed onto cots or benches, too drained to speak. My hand still shook as I cleaned my rifle, the metallic click of the bolt carrier grounding me in routine. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ridgeline erupting with fire, heard the hiss of rounds cutting the air. My body twitched, jerking me awake. Finally, I gave up and sat outside, staring at the mountains under the moonlight. They looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But I knew better. Those ridges weren't just terrain. They were alive with eyes and rifles, waiting for us to step out again. At Skin, the battlefield didn't end when the shooting stopped. It lived inside you, in every heartbeat, every breath, every shadow. And no matter how many times we walked out and came back, the mountains always reminded us we weren't in control. We were just surviving on borrowed time. Loss came to Skin sooner or later. You couldn't avoid it, no matter how careful you were, no matter how tight your squad moved. Out here, the math was simple. If the enemy fired enough rounds, eventually one would find its mark. It was late afternoon when it happened. The sun was sinking behind the ridges, throwing long shadows across the valley. We just returned from a security patrol, dirty and exhausted, when the first mortar fell. The impact shook the ground, dust pluming into the air. Then came another, closer. Alarms wailed, boots pounded, and the base came alive in that awful, familiar way. I grabbed my rifle and sprinted to my fighting position. The air already reeked of smoke and burning earth. Overhead, the sky flashed with tracers as machine gunners laid down suppressive fire. I dropped behind a sandbag wall, heart hammering, ears ringing from the concussions. Then I heard it, the scream. It cut through the chaos like a blade. A voice, raw and desperate. Medic! I turned and saw Johnson, one of the newer guys, sprawled on the ground near the motor pool. His leg was a mess, blood pooling fast, his face pale as ash. The medic was already there, working furiously, hands slick with red. We laid down cover as he tried to stop the bleeding, his voice calm and steady even as the ground shook around us. But calm couldn't stop the truth. Johnson's breathing grew shallow, his eyes fluttered, and then he was gone. Just like that. 1 second a soldier, the next a body. We carried him to the casualty collection point, wrapped in a poncho, silent except for the thud of boots. Nobody said a word. There wasn't anything to say. We all knew what it meant. Tonight, one of us wouldn't be eating chow. One of us wouldn't be bitching about the dust or the food or the endless shifts. One of us was just gone. When the bird came, we stood in silence as the medevac crew loaded him aboard. The rotor wash-whipped dirt into our faces, stinging our eyes, but none of us moved. We just watched as the helicopter lifted off, carrying Johnson home in the cruelest way possible. The silence after was unbearable. Normally, after an attack, we'd trade jokes to shake it off, laugh at how close the rounds landed, pretend we weren't rattled. Not this time. This time, the laughter was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating quiet. That night, nobody slept. Some guys cleaned their rifles over and over, bolts clacking in the dark. Others sat on cots, staring at the floor. I lay awake, listening to the wind whip through the wire, every sound magnified. My mind kept replaying Johnson's face. The fear, the shock, the final stillness. I couldn't shake it. The next morning, we had to act like it was business as usual. Patrols went out. Radios crackled with reports. The routine didn't stop for grief. Out here, it couldn't. You mourned in silence, shoved it deep, and kept moving. But no matter how deep you buried it, the weight stayed. The thing about losing someone at a place like Skin is that it isn't just grief. It's a reminder, a brutal, unrelenting reminder that you're not untouchable. That at any second, the next round could have your name on it. And you start seeing your own death everywhere. In the shadows on the ridgeline, in the hiss of a radio, in the silence between mortar blasts. A week later, it happened again. Different man, different attack, same result. Another black bag carried to the bird. Another piece of the squad carved away. The losses chipped at us, not just as individuals, but as a unit. Every empty cot was a hole in the fabric that held us together. We covered it with dark humor, with cursing, with bravado. But late at night, when the laughter died and the bass went quiet, the holes were all we could see. One night, after a long watch, I found myself staring at the ridgelines, lit faintly by moonlight. The mountains looked calm, almost serene, but I hated them. Hated the silence, hated the shadows, hated that somewhere out there, the same men who'd killed Johnson and the others were watching us. I gripped my rifle so hard my knuckles ached. War wasn't what I'd imagined before coming here. It wasn't medals or heroics. It was dirt in your mouth, fear in your chest, and the knowledge that no matter how good you were, death could find you in an instant. And at Skin, it always did. When my time at Skin finally ended, it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like escape. The convoy out was quiet, each of us lost in thought as the Humvees bounced over rutted trails. I looked back once, watching the base shrink into the distance. The Hesco walls, the towers, the smoke-stained bunkers. It all looked small from afar, fragile, like it could be swept away by the mountains at any moment. And maybe that was the truth. Skin wasn't built to last. It was built to endure for as long as it had to, no matter the cost. For months, I'd lived on adrenaline, exhaustion, and fear. Every sunrise was borrowed time. Every sunset was a gamble. The base had a way of getting into your bones, grinding you down until all that was left was instinct and discipline. You didn't think about tomorrow. You didn't dare. You just survived today and prayed it was enough. Leaving didn't change that. The sound of mortars still lived in my ears, the ground-shaking thump echoing in my chest, even as the miles stretched between me and the firebase. I still saw the ridgelines in my sleep, shadows darting where none should be. I still heard the voices on the radio, low and foreign, whispering in the dark. Most of all, I still saw the faces. Johnson, Harper, the others. The black bags being carried to the waiting birds. The silence afterward. Those weren't just memories. They were anchors, heavy and unrelenting. We didn't talk much about it when we got back. Maybe we didn't know how. How do you explain a place like Skin to someone who wasn't there? How do you tell them about the way your heart seizes at the crack of fireworks? Or how you still sleep with your boots half on, rifle within reach? How do you tell them that a base in the middle of nowhere can haunt you more than any ghost? Because that's what Skin was. A ghost zone. Not because of spirits or legends, but because it left you carrying ghosts of your own. Men who never came home. Moments that replayed endlessly. The weight of survival when others didn't. Sometimes I wonder if the mountains remember us the way we remember them. If the ridges still echo with the sound of gunfire. If the dust still holds the footprints we left behind. I wonder if new soldiers standing in those same bunkers feel the same dread, the same suffocating silence, the same knowledge that death is always watching. Maybe that's the legacy of a place like Skin. It isn't medals or victories. It's survival, scars, and silence. It's the memories you carry long after you've left, the kind that don't fade, no matter how many years pass. Even now, When people ask me about my time there, I don't know what to say. How do you condense hell into words? Sometimes I give them the simple answer. It was rough. Other times, I just stay quiet. Because the truth isn't something they really want to hear. The truth is that Shkin was a place where every day was a fight to stay alive, and not everyone won. I made it out. I got to leave the ghost zone behind. But the truth is, I never really left. Part of me is still there, standing on a ridgeline with rifle in hand, waiting for shadows to move. Part of me always will be. Because at Firebase Shkin, you didn't wonder if death was coming. You only wondered when. And some nights, in the silence, I still do.